Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. This is episode 30, and we're going to talk about school strikes, university strikes, university instructor strikes, and some of the consequences, right? So I want to focus in on a very specific situation so that then people can make the adjustments if they see strikes happening in other places. And they are very remarkably similar. You just have to fill in the blanks a little bit differently. Okay. So there was a strike at my school by grad students in the middle of the semester, right? They just walked off and left all their students without an instructor. I guess those students thought that they were being exploited, that is underpaid. Maybe they thought they weren't receiving, you know, benefits that they deserved, whatever. But here's the thing, I got a doctorate and I had to go through grad school. I would have probably done nearly anything to get a TA-ship, a teaching assistantship, a grad student who's on scholarship. I would have done anything. I was denied a TA-ship the entire time I was there. There was even a special scholarship that was set aside for people just like me, and no one ever bothered to mention it, right? The only one who was qualified in decades to get that scholarship was me, and they didn't even think about bringing it up with me. Why? It's a miracle I graduated. But anyway, so here I was always being jealous of people who had TA-ships, right? And now these guys are like, oh, it's not enough. They're exploiting us. And I thought, wow, okay, that's interesting. I firmly believe, just because I knew what I had to do to be able to graduate, right? And what I had to, the sacrifices I had to make, I knew that all of these other students who were talking about exploitation did not want to make those same sacrifices. And because they weren't making those sacrifices, they went on strike. Now, let's also say that not all grad students at that university went on strike. In other words, was it a fraction of the grad students went on strike? The vast majority of grad students did not go on strike, right? The grad students who had scholarships and TA-ships and things like that, they did not go on strike. Most of the students who went on strike were from the humanities, right? There it is. So a lot of people did the math and they said, right, did the math and they said, well, no, this is actually not a very good idea to go on strike. But they went on strike. They stopped working. And so the classes that they were assigned to teach didn't have instructors. And so they invited other professors, people from the outside too, to step up and take over those classes, which I did as much as I could because I knew I was going to get laid off at the end of the semester. And so why not pad my paycheck a little bit before I leave? I mean, it's not that big of a deal anyway, doubling my teaching load, right? So anyway, they also recruited a lot of undergraduates to join the strike with them, okay? They said, this is injustice what the school is doing to us, so join us on the picket line. And apparently a lot of students joined the grad students on the picket line. Of all the classes I took over, only one student joined the picket line, and several students thanked me for taking over the classes because, they felt like they were being cheated, they paid tuition, and now they're not being taught, right? So there's that. So when all this was taking place, I told my original classes that I was slated to teach, I told them that they should be careful with their choice, that if they decide to go join the strike, that's their choice, okay, but they have to be aware of the risk, of the downside risk, of the possible negative consequences of participating in the strike. And the way that I explained it to them was I told them the story of a person who needed their car repaired. And so a person, owner of a car, it's not working right, takes it into the mechanic and says, hey, my car's not working right. The mechanic looks at it and says, hey, it's a simple job. I can fix it for $500. And the guy's like, oh, that's great. I'll be by tomorrow to pick up the car. So the guy comes back the next day and the mechanic says, you know what? I changed my mind. I want $2,000 to fix this car. And the owner says, well, but wait, you said it was a simple job and then 500 bucks would be enough. And he said, well, I changed my mind. I want $2,000, right? And so really what the mechanic should have said right from the very beginning is I want 2,000. But if he said that from the beginning, the owner would have said, that sounds a little bit too steep. I'm going to take it to another mechanic, right? And so in order to hook the owner of the car, he gives a low bid, and then the owner says, sure, you can repair my car for $500. So now, in order to get the car back, the owner has to pay $2,000. Okay, fine. Everyone understands this situation. So then I said, the mechanic represents the grad students, right? It symbolizes the grad students. The owner of the car represents the university. So my question to you is, who's the car? Most students kind of looked at me funny and like, what are you talking about? There's no one else involved in this. And I said, oh, yes, there is. Who's the car? The car represents the students, in part anyway. One might bring in the parents of the students, whatever, but it's pretty much the students, okay? And so therefore, the car or the students, that's the leverage. That is what the mechanic is using to force the owner or the university to meet their demands. It's basically extortion, okay? And extortion, if you or I do it, see, that's illegal. We go to jail for it, right? But when unions go on strike and they engage in extortion because of the language we are now using, which changes the subjectivity, now it's legal, right? And so Section 7 of the National Labor Relations Act legalizes extortion for unions when they go on strike. And to go further, that same National Labor Relations Act also permits unions to time their strikes for maximum damage, right? So basically, the mechanic is holding hostage all of the students so that the school would meet their demands. In other words, the students are being denied education, right? So they claim it's for better education, while at the same time ruining the education of the car or their students, you see. And so this double speak is made possible by very confused use of words, introducing words with very vague meanings and understanding, very subjective understandings. And so they can get away with it, right? So no one ever really sees the extortion. They just see a battle between justice and injustice. And so I emphasized the fact that the subjectivity and therefore the costs of all the parties involved are now hidden simply because of the subjectivity and the language that everyone was using. So what about the morality of a strike? Well, morality is good. What is good? And I take one step further. What is just, right? What is moral is what is just, right? So you can't say that injustice is moral. That's just kind of weird. So it can't be hypocritical. And so extortion, if it's illegal in some parts of society, well, then it should be illegal here. But if it's legal here, then it should be legal everywhere, right? Some people will even go so far to say, yeah, what's wrong with extortion? Yeah, and which is a very persuasive, convincing argument. I won't get into it here. So some people who want to use the morality card, well, that's subjective, right? The grad students obviously see it as being moral. The university doesn't see it as being moral. Hey, you agreed to teach these students for this amount of money. Now you're not, you're breaking contract. That's immoral, right? So the grad students, if they didn't like how much they were going to be paid, they should have, turned it down. They should have said, yeah, no, I can get a better offer somewhere else. But they accepted it. They agreed to do it. And now they're not keeping their promise. And so doesn't that seem immoral? Also, The grad students promised all of the undergrads who joined the picket line with them, who went on strike with them, that they would take care of them, right? But the grad students had no way of making that promise. And the grad students had made the promise to their undergrad followers, disciples, um, because they thought they were going to be restored to the classes that they walked out of. And of course, the university was not going to let that happen. And so once the strike was over, all those undergrads who participated in the strike, they had to make up 6 weeks of work, and they had 1 week to do it, right? Or some of them just a few days to do it, right? I was a little bit more merciful, right? There was the one girl who joined the picket line, cursed me out, said all these nasty things about me to me in emails to me. You ought to be ashamed of yourself, et cetera, et cetera. Well, but I understand young people, right? I used to be young. I did boneheaded things. And so I offered her an out. I said, hey, do you want to work on how you can make up all the work? And I would have made it really easy. You know what I'm saying? But she never responded. Maybe she was too embarrassed. Maybe she was too ashamed. Maybe she was appalled that the people she went to bat for stabbed her in the back like that, right? But there it is. And so a couple of my students told me that they were on the fence, like they were going to join the strike too. They heard me, but all of their friends were in support of the strike. They bought all their merch, right? The merchandise, they were wearing it, they were joining them on the picket line. And then they were, after the strike was over, they were really upset because they had so much work to make up. And I think a lot of them didn't tell their parents that they're participating in the strike. And so their parents shelling out all that money, they can't tell their parents. And so they were forced to make up the work, and probably had a very, very underperforming semester. All right. So morality, generalizations, racializations, subjectivity work together to hide costs for everyone involved, right? And so what the actual costs were hidden. They're grad students. As I said before, grad students went on strike. Not all of them. Actually, it was a minority of the students went on strike. And most of those students who went on strike were from the humanities. Maybe they're not that great at math. Engineering students, business students who are better at math, perhaps, they were like, oh, yeah, this is a raw deal, and they decided not to participate. And so, like 100 TAs out of 700, I guess, went on strike. And so not all grad students went on strike, right? And also, if you think about it, not all grad students needed benefits in the same way that some did, right? So the needs of some people became the needs of everyone. Generalization, morality, virtue signaling, right? All of that stuff to hide the true costs of what they were asking. So so the grad students won this, or they got most of what they wanted. However, undergrads have to pay for all of those benefits that the grad students demanded, right? So where's it all going to come from? It's going to come from higher tuitions. Or you reduce the number of TAs, and that's what already happened. As soon as the strike was over, they crunched the numbers and they announced to the departments the number of TA lines that they had, the number of TAs that they can have the following year was going to be reduced. And so not everyone won, obviously. And it's just kind of interesting that they really thought that they could go on strike, demand millions of dollars and more benefits and salary, and nothing would change. It's just kind of crazy. So you cannot deny economics. At least they still had a job, right? There was the Trump Taj Mahal. It was a casino that used to be owned by Donald Trump in Atlantic City in New Jersey. And because he was running for president, or before that, he declared bankruptcy or whatever, and he sold off the Taj Mahal, right? And so the new owner was trying to negotiate with the labor unions who were working in the hotel, and they didn't like the agreement. And so they went on strike. And I happened to be at the beach that year. I took pictures. I can't find the pictures, but nevertheless, I told my kids to pose next to the strikers, and I told them that I want them to remember how workers strike themselves out of a job, right? And so I wanted it sort of burned in their memory. And so obviously the workers thought that they were going to win, they were going to get all this money. And the new owner already said, I can't pay you more because we'll be running at a loss. And then why would I run a business at a loss? No, I'm not going to pay you more. You can strike all you want, but I'm not going to pay you more. And so they stayed on strike. And then so finally the owner said, okay, I'm selling off the hotel. And he sold the hotel. And so all of the workers got nothing, right? They just lost their job. So you cannot deny basic economics. So what would be a free market option, right? So keeping all subjectivities in mind, if you remove the government's ability to protect the activities of a minority because it's portrayed in such a way, presented in such a way that is unjust, well, how would the market then not go down the road of racism, discrimination, favoritism, call it whatever you want, bias in law, hypocrisy in law? If you don't go down that route, what's the alternative? How would the free market handle this? Well, if you're working someplace and you don't like how much they're paying you, find another job. It's not that difficult. The thing is, though, that when you go look for another job, what are you bringing to the table? Are you a great worker? Are you a worker that's constantly growing, improving your skill set, improving your knowledge and your ability, your sense of responsibility, all of this stuff? Or you just do the minimum required work necessary and still get paid what everyone else is getting paid, right? Or which kind of worker are you? And if we realize that other companies are more likely to hire a hardworking, industrious, constantly improving worker over someone who's not really motivated, then more workers become self-motivated to constantly become a better worker. All right. So I'll give you an example. Where I was teaching years ago, so I taught there for 17 years. So like 10 years ago, there was rumor going around that some of the full-timers were going to have their teaching load increased, and they all started complaining. But I didn't say anything because I was already teaching that heavier load. In other words, I had to teach 4 classes per semester, and a lot of these other guys were just teaching 7 classes during the year. So they had a semester with 4 classes and a semester with 3. But I was teaching 4. Not only that, but my class sizes were double the size of other people. So I'm like, why are you guys complaining? You have it pretty easy. I don't know what you guys are talking about, right? And so what are we really fighting for, right? So I never complained about, how much I was paid. In fact, I was extremely grateful that I had this job. And so I never complained, but everyone always has a reason to complain. Now I'm looking for a job and I'm thinking, wow, it'd be nice to have that old gig back. But of course, that ain't going to be happening, right? So everything is subjective. And if you can't force anyone to do something that they don't want to do, you are free to leave. You are free to find something better, right? But all we have today are people trying to use a corrupt system their way to benefit them, and the injustice in society increases. And this is why society today is such a mess. Everyone is trying to get a piece of the action for themselves at everyone else's expense without actually trying to improve the amount of value that they bring to the table, that they bring to society. Little food for thought, and I will see you in the next episode.